Hi, Paul here from Spitfire Audio. I've written a short piece today to demonstrate some of the concepts and ideas behind the Abbey Road collection of libraries. So before I start, let's just hear a quick clip from somewhere in the middle. Little swell symbol there. So you get the idea. It's a traditional orchestral film scorey type piece. I've written something that's short so that I can kind of pick out a couple of different concepts as we go through. And the core of the sound here is Abbey Road Orchestra and Abbey Road One. And there's a little dash of Abbey Road Two, which is the solo strings recorded in Studio 2, where the Beatles famously recorded. And we've used the same session layout as was used for Eleanor Rigby. So first of all, what were we trying to achieve with the Abbey Road collection? Now, we started with Abbey Road One, which is like an Albion-like collection of orchestral sounds that is kind of a sketch pad. But we approach this in a different way to the way that we would usually approach this kind of thing, which is we recorded a lot more detail in each individual articulation. And the idea behind that was not only to give you a kind of step up from traditional orchestral sketchpad libraries, but also to give you something that would then lock into more detailed individual section libraries recorded in the same room. So alongside this collection of core orchestral sounds, you also have these selections which contain performance legatos and associated other articulations that do one thing incredibly well. And an example of that here is the thematic horns. And this is to give you this kind of Hollywood sound of a big horn section kind of really playing their hearts out. And similarly, another example that I'm using here is the thematic trumpets. And these, again, are recorded and the performance is directed in a very specific style in the same way that you would record this kind of passage in a real film score recording. Now, why do we record in certain studios? Why is it that certain studios in the world have become these kind of destinations? The answer is quite difficult to pin down. There is a certain amount of luck involved in the fact that when certain buildings and rooms were designed, they just ended up sounding incredible. But what does the room actually do to the sound? Well, let's pop over to a Abbey Road One patch with just a spiccato sound setup. Now you can hear the room, but what is really important here is capturing really useful combinations of microphones. And to do this, we worked with an incredible engineer called Simon Rhodes, one of the senior engineers at Abbey Road, who has recorded all manner of different scores with all manner of different composers. He is a composer and a musician himself, very, very talented guy. When we look through here, you can see that even in this what is a sketchpad library, we've put a really detailed and comprehensive collection of sound options for you, so that when you use this in conjunction with the much more detailed Abbey Road Orchestra line of libraries, you can lock the sound in to get exactly what you want. And that goes from everything from these two different main mixes to keep things simple, to vintage parts using the vintage signal chains and microphones of Abbey Road. You've got the pop closer and room, which give you stereo mics in front of the section. You've got the traditional kind of close, two different tree options, ambient outriggers, and of course the spill mics at the end. So why do we do this? Why record all these different microphones, and why record in these rooms at all? And the answer is that the sound that you're hearing has the DNA of the room stamped into it. And recording in somewhere that's just a kind of dry acoustic and then hoping you can recreate that using a reverb just doesn't work. It's not a solution to get a really great sound. We as human beings, we're trained to hear sound and, for safety, to hear what's coming from where and, how close something is and all of that kind of stuff is kind of built into our subconscious. And when you apply that to music and to hearing music in context, music is designed and has been designed for hundreds and hundreds of years for the context of the location in which it's performed. So it's my belief that it's absolutely essential to record these incredible players with these amazing instruments in these locations that sound absolutely beautiful. So how does that work when we then go into individual parts? Well, in here you can see that I'm using the articulation sets, and if I go down here you can see that you load those into Logic and they work in all different sequences, and the ones that I'm using are from Art Conductor, Babylon Waves. These are really, really useful, and I would strongly recommend them because it means that you can keep your track count quite low, and just use the articulation selection to play in different articulations on the same track. Works really, really well. So Spicatissimo, we've got the close mics, we've got the Tree 2, which I am using because it gives a slightly wider sound, and I wanted this sound to be like a kind of the John Williams-y sound of the Star Wars prequels in Abbey Road, recorded in Abbey Road, but they have quite a wide string sound. And so I'm using the combination of the second tree, which is a bit more directional, and the Omni outriggers. So I'm using outriggers 1, which give you a feeling of kind of more room width. And then I'm using a touch of the mid mics, which are positioned about halfway between the conductor and the section, to give a little bit of closer bite and weight, and then the real detail comes from the close mics. Most of the film scores that you hear have always had a kind of algorithmic reverb applied to them. So it's part of what we recognise as the sound of film score. I'm just going to turn that off for a second and we can just concentrate, focus on the actual sounds of these individual mics. So for example, these close mics, Tree 2, outriggers. Now you can hear how far that positions the violins out to the side, and then the mids. And that gives me a little bit of extra kind of weight in the sound. And when you listen to that as a whole, and we just listen to this part here, and then looking across the entire string section, gives you a really beautiful kind of thick sound. You'll see that I've got a tiny bit of EQ on there, and really all I'm doing is, again, looking at those original recordings and matching. You've got to remember that what we're giving you here is the clay, and so you need to shape it to the exact sound that you want. It's very rare that an orchestral recording will simply just be made and nobody will touch any EQs and there won't be any, these are the things, just these little tiny touches. It's not a huge amount, it's just a little bit of boost up there at the top end. And then with the basses, I've given a bit more weight and a bit more of the kind of crunchy part of the sound. And the reason for that is that in these Star Wars recordings, the way that they're mixed is they really get heavy sound from the basses, but they're very, very audible over at the side there. And they've got a nice kind of bright top end to them. So I've jumped straight into the strings, but how am I organising my session? How have I got this laid out? Let's have a look. So I've got a template here where I've loaded up all of the sounds that are in Abbey Road One, and all of the sounds that we've recorded so far for Abbey Road Orchestra. I should say not all the sounds that we've recorded so far, because we have recorded some sounds that are not yet released. Abbey Road Orchestra is an ongoing project, and to give you some idea of the level of scale and detail in the recordings, we've spent well over $1.5 million so far just on recordings alone. It is by a mile much more detailed than anything else we've ever recorded. So so far the strings, a fair amount of untuned percussion, and the woodwinds, two sections have been released. And so for this track I'm using Abbey Road One sounds to fill in the brass section. So as you can see, the theory is not even just a theory, it's actually used and working in practice. So my template is organized in the same way that you would see a written score, an orchestral score laid out, which is that the woodwinds are at the top here, and I've got the high woodwinds above the low woodwinds so that I can kind of locate things nice and easily. We've got all of that is put into a group here, and it's just a folder, it's just organization. It's not a mix If I show you actually the mixer here, you can see that while this has a VCA to control the overall level of everything coming from the woodwind section, it's not like, for example, if I just find the flutes. And then I can option click that to get it back up there. So that's a kind of virtual VCA. It's not, this is not a mixed group. So these tracks are all going to a bus, and then we'll look at the buses at the bottom actually in a minute. But so that's my woodwind section. Every section has its own dedicated reverb. So in here, I've just used, I want an algorithmic reverb specifically, so I'm using cinematic rooms, and again I'm using the amethyst hall on everything. And just to keep it very, very simple, I've got that, and I'm using a little bit of that in here. So you can, just to give you an idea of the difference, if I switch to stack mo, so here's with and without. So you can hear we're not changing the character of the sound. The sound and the room, the studio that we're recording in is absolutely there. What this is doing is it's just giving you a little bit of a kind of slightly synthetic, beautifying glue around the outside of everything. We are very used to hearing film music recorded this way, because often film music is recorded in multiple locations. You might overdub parts in other places, and so you want to try and have something that's going to help you blend all of this stuff together. But the key core of the sound and the way that the instruments react in the room is this amazing studio, Abbey Road Studio One. So next up, we've got our brass, and I'm using here, they're all ensemble sounds. I've got the basic sounds from the Abbey Road One library. So you can hear it's got that lovely sizzle, and again, the recording in the room has got that beautiful bloom, and then we just put a little bit of the glue around it as well. So we've got horns, trumpets and low brass. These give us our kind of basic articulations, and then thematic stuff from the selections, which gives us the stuff we can use for our melodies. Now, what about strings? I have put in the ensemble sounds, but actually I'm not using them. I've broken everything else down, and I'm also including a little bit of these solo string sounds from Abbey Road 2 towards the end, and I'm using the tremolos here. And the reason for that is just that I'm getting a little bit of bite from these sounds. So, because you can really hear a clear, it's almost like I'm using them like a leader mic over the actual sounds of the sections. It's not essential, but what I really wanted to show more than anything was that you can blend these sounds together. So the sounds that are recorded in Studio 2, if I turn the reverb off here, it's a great tight sound, and it's got the Studio 2 sound to it. But we're not using it for that. We're using it for the little bit of bite that it gives to the top of the main tremolo articulation in the violins here. So if I just open that up again and we look at this. So you get the idea. When you're using that in combination with this one, put them both into record, you can hear that you're getting that extra little colour there, which is quite useful. So here are our string sections, and again I've just put in, sometimes I'm using this as a kind of divisi, but sometimes it is because I want two different sounds happening at the same time, and they might be doubled, but they are playing different articulations. For example here, spiccatissimo and legato. So I'm using the fast legato and the spiccatissimo together to give an extra kind of jagged, blurry sound to the part that I'm using there. Percussion wise, we've got a variety of stuff from Abbey Road One, booms, different types of drums. And then in Abbey Road Orchestra, we've got the amazingly detailed stuff here. So as you can see, this really goes into a gigantic amount of detail with the sticks, hard felt, medium felt, poly, super soft brushes, rute on the rims. You've got a massive collection of sounds in there. There is also a lot of the sounds in this library have right and left hand mapping. You've got all of the microphones. It's very, very detailed. You can use it for everything from a super tight, close percussion sound to this beautiful sound of the orchestra in the room. So I separate my percussion out into different kind of folders to help me navigate it. And you'll notice as well that while the percussion would appear above the strings in an orchestral score, because there's so much of this stuff, I really wanted to have all the melodic stuff together, and then, or the majority of it, and then have my percussion just as one giant block of stuff that I can use. So I separate it into low, high, metal and toys, which are the three main libraries so far. Of course, the Abbey Road One stuff I've put into the relevant folder as well to help me navigate that. And I'm using lots and lots of percussion. Percussion really is the amazing kind of color that you can use in the orchestra. And when you're not worried about how many percussionists you've got and how they navigate their way around a physical percussion section, you can really go to town. And we're writing for the virtual orchestra on this occasion, so I really want to just, or let's say a film score that you could overdub. So I really want to just really enjoy myself. So I'm using all kinds of stuff in here. The one thing that I'm not doing, as you can see, is I'm not using the percussion as a kind of rhythm section. I'm using it purely for accents and for color, and you'll hear that when we play the whole piece. The rhythm comes from the movement of the individual sections of the orchestra and how they interact with each other. I'm using the Abbey Road One timpani. Really sounds fantastic. Again, you've got everything from a kind of that kind of thing. I prefer to play a lot of my rolls, so it sounds kind of like this. And I can do things where I might just do a little swell up and down, and I can control, similarly to how I would physically be playing a timpani, I can control the speed and the dynamic of every individual stroke. And that's the way that I quite like to put my timpani parts in. We've got the Glock and the xylophone from Abbey Road One, as those have not been released yet, from the main Abbey Road Orchestra collection. And just for fun, I'm using Mrs. Mills' piano. So you can Google this. It's an amazing story of piano that the Beatles used a lot. But it was a music hall entertainer called Mrs. Mills who was the famous first performer of this piano. It's treated in a very specific way on the hammers, and it's got a very bright. And so it's almost that kind of music hall sound. The way that I've got it treated here is I'm using quite a lot of the same amethyst hall to sit it in the orchestra. And this is just a bit of fun because I had it and it was here. This is a really great library. It's one of the originals range, and it just sounds fantastic. So what am I using it for? Well, here, if I just solo it, it's doing that kind of orchestral accenty part. Things like this. Almost sounds like old music hall or kind of silent movie music with that with those really hard felts. But let's hear that in context. So you get the idea. So that's my layout. Now, what am I doing with my stems? I have two sets of stems, aux stems and print stems. They're basically identical, but one set are, well, let me go to the mixer. If you look across here, you've got these receive on the individual buses that are sent from each section. There's stuff in here that's not in this session that are just part of my overall stem thing, like synths and swarms and stuff like that. So it's quite detailed, but those are the auxes. And then when you look at the print stems, these are tracks that you can just flick them all into record and grab what's coming. They're all going to bus 256, which is my sum at the end. That gets printed as well. And then we've got a stereo out here. So if I just flick to that channel, you can have a look at that. And this just has one thing on it. It's got this great Fab Filter Pro L. It's just a limiter set very, very gently just to catch any overs, not really affecting the sound. So that's how my session's organized. And then in terms of other things, I'll sometimes flick this down so I can see my tempo mapping. Tempo mapping, very important. Music breathes when you perform it live. And this applies especially to a good orchestra as well. An interesting thing to do, and you can hear this really, really starkly on things like the Nutcracker. ballets in general, but it's very, very audible in the Nutcracker because it's so melodic. So you can hear very clearly what's leading to what the rhythmic elements are. Listen to parts of the Nutcracker and maybe stick it into a door and tempo map it, and it will open your eyes, because you will see how much kind of pull and push there is in the tempo. Now, I've done a little bit here to give kind of sections where things are kind of building up and then they bang. You know, this is only a short piece. It's just over a minute long. It's only really to demonstrate a few different ideas. So before we listen to the whole piece, there's just a couple of ideas that I wanted to point out and how I've achieved certain effects. And one of them is this run that opens, that's near the opening of the piece. Just have a quick listen to this as full context. So you can see we start with the violins going up and down the scale, then the second violins take over, the cellos take over from then, and then that last scale, that last kind of octave, is repeated by the basses to give you the feeling of moving in a kind of semicircle around the sections and landing at the bottom over here. Everything is designed to fit within this bar and then to feel like you're landing on bar 9. Here we've got a section with the violins where using everything in octaves until the final moments where it diverges. That sounds like this. And then within the harmony, if I just unsolo that stuff and play it in context. So it's leading to that following chord. The section here at the end where I mentioned we're using some doublings is in these moving chords. And this is quite a kind of Star Warsy sounding thing, where you have trem chords that are moving in these kind of movements of thirds. So have a listen to this. And in this section, just so you can see things that I'm doing with the colour of the percussion here. Let's just have a listen to those parts on their own. So you can hear there's just little details, little colours in there. We've even got the temple bowls. I'm just putting stuff in that helps either point at different chord changes, or like the timps are doing, they have that little roll into the beginning and then they're doing a kind of offbeat thing that happens a couple of times. And I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to get variety of sound and colour in sound so that you're hearing a really interesting, detailed kind of a tapestry of sound, and having the detail, especially in these things here like the suspended cymbals, the amount of stuff you've got to work with here, the different sounds of the individual cymbals recorded, all of the different kind of playing styles, the level of dynamics means that you can do these little delicate things. You can also do full tilt, but you've got so much colour to work around. It's just incredibly useful. Finally here, just to show how I'm using the brass section, let's solo the brass and just have a quick listen to this one section here. So a couple of things that you can see in there, a nice kind of splatty low brass sound. I'm using a swell in the horns, the trumpets, it's sometimes useful to be able to kind of dive into score view just to see, if you're improvising especially, to have a quick look at what you've just played and see exactly what's going on. I would always say if you can't read notation, it's really simple to pick up. It's a little bit of effort at the beginning to get your head around exactly what you're looking at and how that translates to the sound. But once you've got going, it really opens up a new world of being able to look into this kind of view of things and then investigate the way that these kind of the written notation can influence the way that you compose. But you can look at things in a different way, and it allows you to look at shapes and look at the way that the chords are interacting, and it can give you ideas. So here, for example, That's an E flat or a D sharp. So a major third from, pretty straightforward. Then we go from the B, and that's a tritone. So that's, instead of going to the F sharp, which is down a fourth, you're going, and that's the midpoint between the octaves. It's the tritone. It's the note between a fourth and a fifth, perfect fourth and fifth, and it's a good pivot point. It's quite a useful thing because it has that diminished, but it fits a lot of different things. One of the things I'm using here a lot is the octatonic scale, which gives you a semitone. It's an alternating semitone and whole tone, or vice versa. But for me, semitone, whole tone, semitone, whole tone, semitone, whole tone, semitone, whole tone. So for example, this sound fits into this scale. So you see, you've got all the notes there. It's a really useful scale. It's used a lot in action music, and John Williams uses it a lot. And I'm using parts of that in here as well. So here we go down again from F to C sharp, which is, if you think of that C sharp as a D flat, it's a major third. But when you put the A at the bottom, again, that's an augmented thing. But the notes for this one are just all part of the whole tone scale. And then you land on this note. And again, we do that kind of. So we got that tritone again. So there's lots of kind of stuff. It's like, I'm not rigidly going, oh, everything in this section has to belong to a certain scale, but I'm using some of these things to get an internal logic to things, and then I just make sure that it all fits together, and you kind of get a feel for it. Sometimes you put something in, and then when you actually start to layer the parts on, it doesn't sound quite right. So you think, okay, what could I do that maybe if I have this chord transposed up to this point, chords based. So for example, a major chord separated by a tritone, or a minor chord separated by a semitone, or a minor chord separated by a major third. All of these sounds, you can kind of memorize the feel of them, and then you can kind of pull them out of your bag of tricks when you're ready to write something. So it's all really useful stuff, and getting an idea of the theory of it, of this is a major triad, this is a minor triad, and then sometimes leaving out the fifth altogether. So you only use those for, the first and third. These are all incredibly useful things to do. And of course, there's a lot of really great music that you can listen to the orchestra playing it, and you can read the score and work out exactly how things have been done. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's have a listen to the whole piece through. So I've had a lot of fun writing this. I've learned a little bit more about pitch class sets. That's a fascinating thing to look up if you don't already know what that is. And really wanting to make sure that I understood it properly led me to make a little calculator of my own, which I've put on my website. So I'll put the link to that below and you can have a look at it. And it might be useful to give you ideas. It's designed specifically for me. So it leaves out a couple of the very, very complex bits, but it explains everything that you need to know to actually complete your understanding of it for the use of actually harmonic analysis and writing stuff. It's very useful. I'm kind of always learning stuff. I'm endlessly fascinated by music theory and by the way that things work and the way that the orchestra sounds when you put things together. And I still feel like I'm kind of at the beginning of my journey of composing. There's so much to learn. It's just it can keep you going forever, and then eventually you'll keel over and you still won't have finished learning. So it's a really fascinating thing. It's just wonderful hearing these amazing musicians recorded in such a beautiful studio. Everything really in this whole project, it's kind of like a realization of everything that we've ever tried to do at Spitfire, which is to record the best musicians in amazing studios using all of the best gear that you can have, having people sitting where they would sit in a real recording and treating everything as a real recording, so a real film score recording, and kind of then informing our decisions on what we record and the way that we record different articulations from compositional ideas, from like, okay, what do you really need to be able to make something that sounds exciting or sounds beautiful or sounds melancholic, or all of these different sounds that these incredible musicians can make. And we're just endlessly grateful for the fact that they share their talent with us, so that people all over the world can experience the joy of hearing this amazing sound. So remember that when you buy a library, you're paying the musicians. The musicians earn royalties from this. The studios earn royalties, the engineers. So you're helping to support the system that is keeping music human and keeping music alive. Thank you very much for watching. I hope there was something you could take away from this that may help you give a spark an idea in your own pieces. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.